Do I touch? I knew this was going to happen. Okay, touch harder. All right. Thank you, Leslie, and thank you, Omar, for this invitation. Thank you, everybody here at Cooper. Thank you for coming this beautiful afternoon. I'm very humble to be here today and to try to wrestle with some of the things that happened last year, and to see if by choosing a couple artists for guidance, we can have a conversation about where we are today. When Leslie and Omar made this invitation, they were very detailed. They gave me an email with what was supposed to happen tonight. The invitation was to theorize on the present moment in regards to its political and ethical, hi, Vincent, dimension. Sorry, I'm like saying hello to my friends just to feel better. And that's a bit hard because I work at a museum. So I was saying to Leslie earlier that when I went to school in Chicago for painting and printmaking at the Art Institute, I was given this sheet of rules that John Cage wrote about how to be a student. And one of the things that he said, and I always remember this, is that when you produce, you cannot judge. You know, the two activities are separate, and it's hard to be evaluating and producing at the same time. So in a way, the reason why it's challenging for me to speak today is because I work in this production of exhibition making and museum practice, museum life every day. So I feel like I'm in the middle of it. So to take a distance and try to evaluate something, it takes some maneuvering. But I feel like the reason I accepted the invitation is because something really bad happened in our playground. And it's a very serious thing for me and for many curators and for many artists I know. And particularly because something got really altered when over a period of concentrated in 1 year, we saw one after another attacks on artists, censorship, and like Leslie mentioned in my description, these very stressful micro and macro violence being directed at artists and then by consequence to the museum. The museum for me has always been a temple in a way. It's where I went to school, as I said, at the Art Institute, where it was connected to a museum. So I come from a place where I think the museum is the custodian and caretaker for art, and therefore a mediator and a catalyst and a partner in that journey when an artist is invited to have an exhibition or mount or be acquired for the collection. So to make a little joke, there will be a few jokes throughout the talk, I wanted to show you these because I feel like we all been there. We all been in a museum where the guard is blocking the view. And I was often going back to this cartoon and thinking, but really, is it the guard blocking the view, or is it us who are come already predetermined with certain obstacles from our education, from our economic backgrounds, from our rapport to others, that apart from the constraints that the museum offers, this adds to the dimension of not seeing the art. And then ultimately in this day and age, escaping to reproductions of the art. So a lot of the things that shocked me in the debates of last year was that great number of commentary that was given to the events was done by people who hadn't seen the works. So the works of art were commented on based on reproduction, so based on word to mouth. And that alarmed me because it reminded me when I was much younger, and I was in Chicago in the 90s, when Kara Walker was attacked. And I was still in school, and at the Renaissance Society, she had her first show, and it was during this time that great deal of censorship was occurring around her work, and really a difficult moment. So I grew up, in a way, I came of age with that moment, and really marked me of the vulnerability the artists face every time they show their work. But to begin with the title, where does this title come from, besides the fact that I have an accent and English is not my first language, and so it was tongue-in-cheek to my own hang-up. But this title comes from doing some work in the archive at MoMA and finding a letter by Meret Oppenheim. This little note from the Chelsea, in the letterhead of the Chelsea Hotel, was written by Oppenheim when she was in New York, already in her 50s. And this is 1965, and she was looking for Alfred Barr, who was then just director of collections, not director of the museum anymore. And she left him a note saying that she had visited the museum twice and wanted to see him. And at the end, she writes an exclamation point, "Excuse my English." So I want to dedicate this talk to all artists that apologize for their work, for their English, for whatever. I feel like I do this work because that should not happen. There should not be an apology. This work particularly was very controversial, as maybe some of you who are studying art history know, when it was first shown here in New York as part of the Surrealism exhibition called Fantastic Art, Data, and Surrealism at MoMA in 1936. It caused controversy, and it followed it throughout its tour throughout the United States. It took about 25 years, I believe, being held from being acquired. It went through different motions, first because Alfred Barr bought it for himself at one point, then later it entered the study collection, and then finally in '63 it was officially acquired. So that goes to show a very long journey for a small cup and a saucer and spoon, all because the artist who did it was being transgressive. So one of the things I was reflecting upon with the controversies of last year is how we have shifted from understanding art as an Oedipal problem, a confrontation with the father or a confrontation with the mother, into a narcissistic problem. We've come to, the experience of art has become all of a sudden all about our narcissistic experience. People think that artists are making art for them, and they approach it as such. They are offended. And this is something that comes again and again in the conversations of last year, was people being offended, as if artists are making art about them. And this troubles me, because being offended is the first sign of being a narcissist. So I want to put that provocation out to everybody, because when we take this place and we focus on the self, on us being offended, we are, and with dealing with art, not with dealing with interactions with one another, that is on a different level, but we're talking about art. How can a work of art offend you? And when it offends you, what does it take for you to lose your position of perspective and indicate with violence its removal, or wanted to be burned, or wanted to be censored, wanted to be destroyed? These are very big things, and I think this kind of joke here points out into the situation. We have a frame, we have visitors on the other side. Is it a mirror? Is it a frame? And where are you? Are you the one that is a masterpiece? I picked some artists to help me wrestle with this anxiety, the anxiety of finding yourself in a position where I work with artists, but the institutions, the question of the institution has been interrogated. The goodwill of the institution has been interrogated. Can we say full confidently that an artist can trust a museum anymore? So when I was recently in Athens last year to see the Documenta, I encountered this beautiful work and terrific sculpture by the artist Banu Senetoglu. It's called Gurbert's Diary from 2016-17. And it consists, as you can see, of 2 shelves with little limestone slabs that have etched in them, transcribed in them, the pages of the diary of a journalist, which I'll go into in a minute. Banu, I met several years ago on a research trip to Istanbul, and this is a view of her old studio. She's kept herself very close to books, trained as a photographer, but works a lot in printed media and artist books. And this is how it looks. Her daily life often looks like this. So when she was invited to Documenta, she thought to do a homage, a memorial for a Turkish journalist. I'm looking for my page, sorry. And her name is Gurbeteli Erzog. I'm sorry, my Turkish is pathetic. She was a journalist and the first female editor of a Turkish newspaper, Özgür Gündem, which focused on Kurdish issues. This newspaper no longer exists. And she was arrested in 1993, then released, and in 1995 she joined the Kurdish militia. And these little stones that Banu inscribed have in Greek the translation of her diaries for 2 years. She died in combat at the age of 32. This is a picture of her. At the time that Banu did this piece, it was reported that over 150 journalists were imprisoned in Turkey, and that 177 media and news outlets were closed. So what does this mean to make a tribute like this, to memorialize a journalist? Is it really about her, or is it about something else that affects all of us, not only the case of the Turkish and Kurdish conflict, or not just the specificities of Banu's life or Banu's context, but for me, it was a piece that touched me because it spoke about our eventual death. These litos take on the form of gravestones, and we are all going to end there. So for me, it was a piece that carried more than just its basic reference, but opened up to the question of where we stand, and what can art allow us to think peace. So what does it mean for Banu to leave this lito with the Greek translation of this book? This diary was eventually published. It was published in Germany first and then later in Turkey. So it exists in Turkish. And this was a collaboration with a Greek translator to have it also be in Greek. So standing there, I felt the violence, the terror, but also this contemplation to thinking peace, that final peace of death. So museums for me have to remain that space for thinking this. And we have to insist. Now, this is a work that causes great controversy among people who feel the threat of a government, right, of being persecuted. It's a work that, for a lot of people who worry about Banu's safety, yeah, so it takes quite a bit of courage. So this kid says to the parents, I'll go in and look at stuff, but I won't read any signage. As often how I think people want to approach art. They want to only have the aesthetic experience, the pleasurable experience, and avoid reading what the titles of things are. But as artists, they have taught me a lot about not closing my eyes, not being hypersensitive to things that make me uncomfortable. Because in that discomfort, there is a great deal of learning that we have to do. This artist is Thomas Hirschhorn. This is a work he did in 2003 for the Tate. It was an exhibition called Commonwealth, curated by Jessica Morgan. And it is a large 50-foot-long sculpture. This is how Thomas' studio looks like. And these are close-ups that show you a little bit of what goes on here. There are 44 rooms. In each room, there's a wallpaper with a reproduction of an event where one understands there's evidence of democracy or a definition of democracy. Each room is different. One room could be Palestine, another Mexico, another the United States, another Abu Ghraib, and so on and so forth. The rooms are all the same size. They all have furniture, small children's furniture, toys furniture, suggesting that this is the hotel room, a hotel room with a motif, right, of democracy. But what does that mean, right? That we all have different definitions of democracy. I think that Thomas is touching on a nerve that here sometimes we forget, that just because we have a democratic system, elections and so forth, there cannot be democracy without equality. And that he takes that very seriously, coming from Switzerland, where there is a system of direct democracy that is very different than us. And he wants to push back and say, well, is it democracy, a country where children live in landfills? Is it democracy, a country where we invade other countries? Is it a democracy where you have to have the military guard the minings, and so on and so forth? In each of the rooms, you have his intention to question what is the rule of the people? What does it make a democracy function? Now, museums are not democratic. We know that, and in part of the great benefit of the museum is to avoid consensus. Right, so when these events happened last year, these problems of the first world, the problems of the first world we had last year, I kept thinking a lot about how people wanted to create consensus, some sort of general agreement that we all agree that Dana should have been censored. We all wanted to agree that Huang Yongping should not be showing at the Guggenheim. Everybody wanted to create some sort of mysterious bubble of agreement. But museums should avoid legitimizing consensus. My friend and philosopher Marcus Steinweg defined consensus as, and I quote, the rigor of all thoughts lies in its resistance to implication which threatens to pull it down before it begins to ascend. Consensus cannot be the beginning of thought. We cannot think through consensus. And we cannot definitely think about art through consensus. So what does art that makes us uncomfortable does to us? Well, it does this. We are in front of a work, and I said, I wonder what it means, not tell me what it means. There is a defense for I want to defend tonight to you and to also provoke you to think this, that art should remain opaque, that there should be an insistence by artists on opacity, on maintaining, not explaining, insisting on not explaining. Why is that? Because we are not making, the knowledge of art is not one that can be defined in simple terms. It needs to remain in a place where there is the opening or an opening for a different take, a different position, a different response, not just one label that is defining it for you and making it into baby food. When I met the artist, the late artist, Jack Whitten, and I visited his studio in 2014, I felt this, and it was reaffirmed to me. It was the first time I had been to his studio in Long Island, in Queens, in Queens. And Jack, who was still with us then, was finishing this piece. This work is titled Atopolis for Edouard Glissant. And when I walked into his studio, I understood that I was in the presence of something else. These are, the painting consists of 8 panels. This is Jack. This was Jack. He's no longer with us, although I prefer to think that he's still with us. And for each of the panels, he constructed with acrylic these mosaic parts, these little pieces that he cut and reshaped according to his needs. You know, when he explained to me how he arrived to this technique, he explained it from the position of not being able to paint with a brush. When he came to Cooper, he was a student here in 1960. He came during segregation to the north and came to New York, was very close to some of the abstract expressionists who gave him materials and who encouraged him to stick to his abstract paintings. He explained that he wanted to find his own determination of how to paint, how to make paint, he called it. He didn't want to paint, but to make paint, to make paintings. And this was his response to that. I said that this is also a commemoration to Edouard Glissant, to the poet and the novelist from Martinique. He met Glissant through Jane Cortez, the poet, who was married, the late wife of Melvin Edwards. And Glissant was here in New York teaching at NYU, and Jack and him became friends. And when he died, he dedicated this painting to him. And the title should give us a little bit, here's the title, give us a sense of what Whitten was after. So Glissant was known to be a quintessential thinker of post-colonialism. For those of you who read the homework, the pieces that I sent to the students, he wrote extensively about the Atlantic, about the Antilles, right? The creolization, this concept of the union, of the mixing of Europeans, West Africans, and American indigenous people of the Caribbean. And when Jack met him and understood that Glissant was offering a solution for himself, for Whitten. Whitten had married an Euro-American, and he had spent half of the year in Greece, learned the language, and operated in a bicultural life, in a place that he could not have here in the United States. He combines in this word atopolis 2 Greek terms that I think are worth pondering a little bit on. Atopos, non-place, and polis, city. And when he talked to me about this painting, he told me that it was he wanted to make a painting about this without place, this sensation of being unwelcome because there's no place for you. It's beyond exile. Exile is a feeling that you cannot go back to where you came from. But without place is that you have nothing where you came from anyway. And I feel like with a lot of the artists that I'm showing you tonight, this is a common place of feeling. It is in art where they find their place. But in the concepts that we have established, they have informed ourselves, our sense of self, nationhood, land, culture, language, race. These are not the places for these artists. So being without place, for me was an optimistic offering from Jack to insist on that opacity of not having, of lacking, and remaining there. This work is tremendous. It's on view right now at the Baltimore Museum of Art. If you happen to be in Baltimore, there's a show for Jack Whitten, curated by Katie Siegel, that I just went to see a couple of days ago, and it's extraordinary, and includes this work. So this intersect, this opacity, we don't know where we are. We're flying is an aerial view, perhaps, of multiple cities. There are multiple centers. There's no one center. And I guess this was also the one thing that early on it hit me when thinking about the lecture the other night, is that museums are constructions. You know, I never walk to a museum and not have the sense that I'm inside an artifice. Museums are intended to be this artifice. These are not natural environments. There's no natural place other than the studio of an artist for art. There's no natural place. These are construction. And as constructed situations that the museums are, we have to suspend, when we are in the museum, it's this sense of that we are in some natural setting. This is not a natural setting. This is a constructed setting. And because it's constructed, and I want to insist on that, we can deconstruct it. So it is our role, museum curators, museum directors, artists, all together, the viewer, we have to deconstruct. But what does it mean to deconstruct if we're like going really close to the term? To deconstruct doesn't mean burn it. To deconstruct means work within it. Work within it. Find the space, the openings within it to change, to alter, to introduce, to invent, but not eliminate. Eliminate is not deconstruction. So we need to refine ourselves from, I understand that there was a lot of anger involved, and there are other issues that are being triggered and channeling in these debates. But when we are in front of art, we need to remember that the space of art is a place of constructed scenarios. It's a construction. And that there is where we can insert ourselves, whether we do it through the medium of making exhibitions, of writing about art, of making art. Sorry to sound so preachy, but I feel like it's a very complicated conundrum that the affluent societies of the West seem to have. Because this is our affluent problem, right? The problem of affluent people, that you will walk into a place and say, this artwork doesn't belong here. This artist should leave the museum. It's something that still in my head, it doesn't make any sense. So I come into this other cartoon thinking, okay, we are inside the whale. Maybe that is what this is. Maybe that the benefits of the life we have, for however crooked and imperfect it is It's just that we are inside a well, and we must know which direction we will go to get out. But then, again, I have moments of clarity. And they're not easy moments either, because, for example, this recent work, and this is the last work I'll show, and then we can talk, because I wanted to leave enough time so we can have a real conversation. And since I gave some big statements earlier, I feel like maybe some people are like, I'm not sure. So I'll just finish here with this work by Kara Walker that I went to see in New Orleans. And it was intended to be a commission, and then it ended up being the problem of the artist. So this is a work that she exhibited outdoors called the Catastrophe Caravan. It's in Creole, to mean you can read it, no? Caravan of Catastrophe. And it's a calliope made with steam water generator that produces steam, and then it plays a keyboard of 38 keys that Kara programmed with the help of technicians to play a playlist of songs. And during the debut, she had her collaborator, and who will be speaking next here, the composer and artist Jason Moran, play music live. This is Kara with her fabricators, who put this together, who do this as a hobby, the tradition of the 18th century. And this is how it looked on the day that I attended the first day of preview. Now, when I was thinking about why do I wanted to bring Kara into this, I was thinking about what happens when things don't go right? I mean, I talk a lot about what happened when the public overreacts, hypersensitive, offended, calls in for the cancellation of a show, calls in protests for the censorship of a work. But what happens when the institution bails on an artist? So this was a project that nearly didn't happen. And it didn't happen not because there was censorship, but because we didn't do our job. So even within our situation of where to attribute blame, I think that what we need to remember again and again, especially those of you who want to be artists, which I'm dedicating this talk is to you, the ones who want to be artists. Obviously, although everybody else is welcome, but I'm talking very casually for the future artists of the United States, to think this through. It's a mutual collaboration, right? The artist does one part of the equation, the institution ought to do the next part, the other half. Otherwise, this is not a fair, equal relationship. I bring this up because I was in the periphery of this commission, understanding the challenges of it. And I've done commissions before with artists, and I know what it takes. So we want to find a middle ground for our relationships between the institution, the artist, and find a way to protect one another from what may seem very uncomfortable at times or impossible at times to wrestle with. Because these thoughts and these emotions, these reactions, these aggressive thoughts, and these primary reactions to art come from a real place. So I don't want to dismiss them, but I want to say we have to learn to hold tight to it and to wrestle with them, not to try to just simply run from it and to call in the Packers to close the show. So I am of the mind that all works of art have to be defended, even if they cause disturbances. Thank you.